I'm not ashamed.
How would the Egyptians know that the God of Israel is the one true God? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Exodus chapter 7. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 7. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus chapter 7, beginning at verse 1. So the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. Then Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded them, so they did. And Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. In our last episode, we discussed the genealogies of Moses and Aaron. We briefly discussed the fact that these genealogies have been telescoped to include only those people who are important to the story. The way we know this is by looking at the sheer numbers of Levites who left Egypt and determining that these numbers would require each grandson of Kohath to have about 850 male descendants each. Although anything is possible with God, we simply don't read of families that large anywhere in the Bible, including in the other tribes of Israel during their Egyptian bondage. Their families were large, yes, but not as large as having over 850 sons each. What we must remember is that genealogies are kept differently in the Bible times than they are today, with Bible genealogies usually recorded in such a way as to only include information pertinent to the topic under discussion. What we're talking about here is an additional 3 to 4 generations that would be missing in order to meet the population numbers described in the book of Numbers. We're not talking about hundreds of missing generations, as some want to add to the genealogies in Genesis. We're talking about a few generations that were skipped in order to provide us with a concise genealogy of the family of Moses and Aaron. Let's now move on to today's reading. Chapters and verses, as we've said many times, were added by men long after the Bible was written. Verses 28 to 30 of chapter 6 really do belong in chapter 7, as those words connect with today's reading. Exodus 6, 28 to 30 says, And it came to pass, on the day the Lord spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I am the Lord. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you. But Moses said before the Lord, Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips, and how shall Pharaoh heed me? It is said here that the Lord appeared to Moses and told Moses to go and tell Pharaoh all that I will say unto you. Moses told the Lord that he was skeptical as to whether he could go and talk to Pharaoh because of his uncircumcised lips. This is a figure of speech, meaning that Moses saw his lips as unfit due to his lack of eloquence. If you look back to verses 10 to 13 of chapter 6, you find a very similar encounter with Moses' response to God being the same thing. Thus, it is fairly safe to conclude that this encounter in verses 28 to 30, which continues in chapter 7, is actually an expansion of what verses 10 to 13 of chapter 6 said, and not a second occurrence. Why would this event be spoken of twice? Well, for one, the genealogies of Aaron and Moses interrupted the narrative here, so refreshing the mind of the reader is typical in writing. A second reason for this, though, is that verses 10 to 13 of chapter 6 only give us a general understanding of what God told Moses, whereas this section expands on what God said, a technique that is employed in numerous other places in the Bible as well. Moses was telling God that he was not eloquent enough to talk to Pharaoh, for the children of Israel wouldn't even believe him. In chapter 7, God reiterates to Moses that Aaron would be Moses' spokesman. In verse 1, God said that Moses would be as God to Pharaoh and Aaron would be as Moses' prophet. Again, just like when God used this language in Exodus 4:16, God was not saying that Moses is God, but that he would be as God to Pharaoh because Moses would be speaking the direct words of the Lord. Aaron would be Moses' prophet in this comparison because Aaron would be Moses' mouthpiece, just like a prophet, when he speaks, is the mouthpiece of God himself. He was to tell Pharaoh to let Israel go, this time permanently. God, however, knew the heart of Pharaoh and knew that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened when told to let Israel go. When this happened, he would perform signs and wonders in Egypt, but even these weren't going to convince Pharaoh. This rejection of God by Pharaoh gave God justification in smiting Egypt for their disobedience and bringing out Israel well-equipped and organized by tribes into an army. When the Lord would stretch his hand out against Egypt and bring Israel out, they would recognize that he is Jehovah, the eternal, unchanging, and only God of this universe, for only the true God of this universe would have the power to perform the signs that he did and accomplish his will in spite of Pharaoh's stubborn rejection. Moses and Aaron did all that the Lord commanded. Our reading closes by telling us that Moses is 80 years old and Aaron is 83 years old when they went to speak to Pharaoh. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 7, verses 8 to 13, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.